Diana Morgan. She was a Southern belle in a small North Carolina town. I was taught that no prince of royal blood was too good for me. Her father had been a prosperous cotton merchant and owner of a general store. It's the kind of town you became familiar with in Thornton Wilder's Our Town. You knew everybody. We were the only people in town who had a library. Her father's recurring illness, together with the oncoming of hard times, the farmers and the townspeople unable to pay their bills, caused the loss of the store. He went into bankruptcy. The banks failed about the time I was getting ready to go to college. My family thought of me going to Wellesley, Vassar, Smith. But we had so little money, we thought of a school in North Carolina. It wasn't so expensive. It was in my junior year, and I came home for Christmas. I found the telephone disconnected. And this was when I realized that the world was falling apart. Imagine us without a telephone. When I finished school, I couldn't avoid facing the fact that we didn't have a cook anymore. We didn't have a cleaning woman anymore. I'd see dust under the beds, which is something I had never seen before. I knew the curtains weren't as clean as they used to be. Things were beginning to look a little shabby. The first thing I noticed about the Depression was that my great-grandfather's house was lost, about to be sold for taxes. Our own house was sold. It was considered the most attractive house in town, about 150 years old. We even had a music library. Imagine my shock when it was sold for $5,000 in back taxes. I was born in that house. I never felt so old in my life as I felt the 2 years out of college. 'Cause I hadn't found a new life for myself, and the other one was finished. I remember how embarrassed I was when friends from out of town came to see me, because sometimes they'd say they want to drink a water, and we didn't have any ice. We didn't have an electric refrigerator and couldn't afford to buy ice. There were those frantic arrangements of running out to the drugstore to get Coca-Cola with crushed ice, and there'd be this embarrassing delay, and I can remember how hot my face was. All this time, I wasn't thinking much about what was going on in this country. I was still leading some kind of social life. Though some of us had read books and discussed them, there wasn't much awareness. Oh, we deplored the fact that so many of our young men friends couldn't find suitable things to do. One day, a friend of my father stopped me on the street and said, "Would you like a job?" A friend of mine is director of one of those New Deal programs. She'll tell you about it. Oh, I was so excited, I didn't know what to do. The thought of having a job? I was nervous, but very hopeful. Miss Ward came. She looked like a Helen Hawkinson woman, very forbidding, formal. She must have been all of 45, but to me she looked like some ancient, very frightening person from another world. She said to me, "It's not a job for a butterfly." She could just look at me and tell that I was just totally unsuitable. I said I was young and conscientious, and if I were told what I was supposed to do, I would certainly try to all the best of my ability. She didn't give me any encouragement at all. When she left, I cried for about an hour. I was really a wreck. I sobbed and thought how unfair she was. So I was very much amazed to receive a telegram the next day summoning me to a meeting in Raleigh for the directors of women's work. There were dozens of women there from all over the state, of all ages. It seemed to be very chaotic. Everyone was milling around, talking about weaving projects, bookbinding, canning. Everyone there seemed very knowledgeable. I really didn't know what they were talking about. And nobody really told me what I was supposed to do. It just seemed that people were busy, and I somehow gathered that I was in. So I went back home. I went to the county relief offices of the courthouse. There were people sitting on the floor of a long hallway, mostly black people, looking very depressed, sad. Some of them had children with them. Some of them were very old. Just endless rows of them, sitting there, waiting. My first impression was, oh, those poor devils. Just sitting there and nobody even saying, we'll get to you as soon as we can. Though I didn't know a thing about social work, what was good and what wasn't good, my first impulse was that these people should be made to feel somebody was interested in them. Without asking anybody, I just went around and said, have you been waiting long? We'll get to you just as soon as we can. I got the feeling the girls in the office looked very stern, in that they had a punitive attitude. That the women just had to wait as long as they were there, and that you had to find out and be sure they were entitled to it before they got anything. I didn't know a thing about sewing, bookbinding, canning, the approved projects. I'd never boiled an egg or sewed a stitch. But I knew seamstresses who used to make clothes for us when we were children. I went to see them and got them to help me. I sought help from everybody who knew how to do things. In the meantime, I would work in the relief office, and I began interviewing people and found out how everybody, in order to be eligible for relief, had to have reached absolute bottom. You didn't have to have a lot of brains to realize that once they reached that stage and you put them on an allowance of $1 a day for food, how could they ever pull out of it? Caroline, who used to cook for us, came in. I was so shocked to see her in a position where she had to go to an agency and ask for food. I was embarrassed for her to see me when she was in that state. She was a wonderful woman with a big heart. Here she was, elderly by now, and her health wasn't good at all. And she said, oh, the Lord's done sent you down from heaven to save me. I've fallen on hard times. How beautiful you are. You look like an angel to me. In the typical Southern Negro way of surviving, she was flattering me. I was humiliated by her putting herself in that position and by my having to see her go through this. Diana weeps softly and continues only with difficulty. For years, I never questioned the fact that Caroline's house was papered with newspapers. She was our laundress for a while, and I remember going to her house several times. Caroline was out in the yard, just a hard patch of dirt yard, with a big iron pot with fire under it stirring, boiling the white clothes. She was always gracious and would invite me in. She never apologized for the way anything looked. I thought to myself at that time, how odd that Caroline uses newspapers to paper walls. I didn't have any brains at 11 or 12 or whatever to think, what kind of country is this that lets people live in houses like this and necessitates their using the Sunday paper for wallpaper? I'm shocked that I can't say to you, when I was 12, I was horrified when I first went into this house. I was surprised, but I wasn't horrified. The girls at the office, when the clients had all gone, it's funny, you treat them this way and you still call them clients. When they had all gone, the girls would be very friendly with me. They would ask what I wanted to know and would show me the files. I was quite impressed with their efficiency. And when they were dealing with clients, they were much more loose. I didn't see why they had to be this way. Perhaps they were afraid the people in town would think they were too easy, the welfare people. Because even then, people were saying that these people are no good. They didn't really want to work. Oftentimes, there were telephone calls saying, so-and-so Joe Jones got a bag of food from welfare, he got an automobile, or his wife's working, or something like that. I spent my time away from the job talking to my old friends, defending the program, saying, you don't know about the situation. They would tell me I was terribly sentimental and that I had lost my perspective. That was when I first heard the old expression, if you give them coal, they'd put it in the bathtub. They didn't even have bathtubs to put coal in. So how did anybody know that's what they'd do with coal if they had it? We were threatened the whole time because funds were constantly being questioned by the legislators. After I'd been there 3 months, the program was discontinued. But by this time, I was absolutely hooked. I could almost weep thinking about it. I told Miss Ward, who had by now become my staunch friend, that this is what I want to do with myself. I want to do something to change things. By this time, the girls in the office, Ella May was the one I liked best, were perfectly willing to let me interview people because they had more than they could do. Something like 150 cases each. In 2 months, I was employed as a caseworker. As I recall, when a person came into the office and applied for help, you filled out a form, asked all those humiliating questions. Does anybody work? Do you own your own house? Do you have a car? You just established the fact that they had nothing. Nothing to eat. And they had children. So you gave them one food order. You couldn't give them shoes or money for medicine without visiting and corroborating the fact that they were destitute. So of course, you get out as fast as possible to see these people before the $4 grocery order ran out. You know, the day after tomorrow, I used to drive out to make house calls. It was the first time I'd been off Main Street. I'd never been out in the rural area, and I was absolutely aghast at the conditions in the country. I discovered, the first time in my life, in the country, there was a place called the Islands. The land was very low, and if it rained, you practically had to take a boat to get over where Ezekiel Jones or whoever lived. I remember a time when I got stuck in this wretched Ford and broke down little trees and laid them across the road to make traction, just so you could get out. Now, I regard that as one of my best experiences. If somebody said to you, what would you do, having been brought up the way you were, if you found yourself at 7 o'clock at night out in the wilderness with your car stuck and water up to your hubcaps or something like that? Wouldn't you worry? What would you do? I could get out of there. I could break down a tree or something. It helps make you free. I would find maybe 2 rooms. A dilapidated wooden place, dirty. An almost paralyzed looking mother, as if she didn't function at all. Father drunk, unshaven. Children of all ages around the house. And nothing to eat. You thought you could do just absolutely nothing. Maybe you'd write a food order. The WPA came along shortly after this. Roosevelt recognized that people cannot stay on relief forever. It degrades them. It takes away their manhood. I'm sure he'd be appalled that people today who are on relief in Chicago are allocated 27 cents a meal. That's just about what it was in 1930, and it was inadequate then. This family... The Rural Rehabilitation Program came along, the RRA. I had the joy of certifying certain families for the relief rolls to go to the land bought by the government. To have better houses, to have equipment. And I saw this family move to a different house. Saw that woman's face come alive. The one who'd been in that stupor, her children clean, her house scrubbed. I saw this family move from a hopeless situation. The man had been a sharecropper. Apparently he had once been a very good worker. And there he was with nothing till... I could go on about that. I had 12 families in this program, and LMA had 12. It was a beautiful farm, maybe 300 acres, with houses, not 2-room shacks. LMA and I were involved in the thrilling task of selecting the families. LMA would say, "I think just Clark would be good." And Davis, the man in charge of the program, would say, "That old lazy bum, he's not going to be able to do nothing. You're just romantic." So we became personally involved in seeing these people prove their own worth. Every month, the program was threatened with lack of funds. We didn't know if Congress was going to discontinue it. A lot of the public thought the money was being spent foolishly. With the program in danger of being killed from month to month, the state administrator suggested she accept other job offers. She attended the New York School of Social Work under federal auspices. She married. There was an absence of 6 months from the county. The first thing I did when I got back, I got out of the car and rushed over to the courthouse to know, how did these people perform? Did they make it? I talked about this one white family. There was a Negro family, 9 of them living in one room. The man was not young. He was in his 60s, but he impressed me as being a strong person who would really make it if he had a chance. Every one of the people we had certified had done well and had begun to pay back the loans. Not one of them had been lazy and done a bad job. They were absolutely vindicated. The people were vindicated, not us. In 1934, she and her husband moved to Washington, D.C. They were there 11 years. I'd been invited to a First Families of Virginia ball at the George Mason Hotel. I'd been picketing it the week before because they paid their workers some ridiculous wage of like 75 cents an hour. When I answered the invitation, I didn't just say, "Mrs. So-and-so regrets she's unable to accept." I wrote a letter and said I couldn't possibly go to a hotel where the wages were so unfair. My husband was very much surprised. He said, "I never dreamed you would take that kind of stand." Well, I never dreamed I wouldn't. I like to think that even if we hadn't lost our house, even if I hadn't the job with the Civil Works Administration, I might have waked up someday. But maybe I would have just worked on at the community chest or the St. Luke's fashion show. I don't know. Maybe I'd never have understood how people feel if I weren't subjected to it. Maybe you do have to experience things personally. Do people in Lake Forest or Grosse Pointe or Scarsdale have to have their houses burned down and bombed before they recognize the state of their society? As long as it happens a few miles away, or in the city if you live in the suburbs, you just read about it. Postscript. I went to a women's board meeting of a great university. On the way, I had taken the wrong exit from the superhighway and had to go through an area where I was appalled by the look of the people. Just absolute hopelessness. At the meeting, there were black and white women. well-off, intelligent women, middle, upper, privileged people, the top 1%. I thought maybe when they refurbish the studio of a great sculptor who used to be here and is now gone, they could somehow begin to think about 3 blocks away, what's going on here? I said to one of these women, "Have you driven through this neighborhood lately?" She said, "Diana, dear, with all the new housing projects and everything, it's much, much better." I realized at once that nothing I could say would make them understand.